2001 New Year Honors. The 2001 New Year Honors list is one of the annual New Year Honors, a part of the British honours system, where New Year's Day, 1 January, awards for 2001, announced on 30 December 2000, included the United Kingdom, New Zealand, the Cook Islands, Barbados, Grenada, Papua New Guinea, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Belize, and St. Christopher and Nevis. United Kingdom. Privy Councillor Tessa Ann Vosper, Baroness Blackstone, Minister of State, Department for Education and Employment. Keith John Charles Bradley, MP, Member of Parliament for Manchester, Withington. Treasurer of H.M. Household, Deputy Chief Whip. Wyville Richard Nichols Rainsford, MP, Member of Parliament for Greenwich and Woolwich. Minister of State, Department of the Environment, Transport and the Regions. Elizabeth Conway, Baroness Simmons of Vernham Dean, Minister of State, Ministry of Defence. Knight Bachelor Nicholas Bevan, C.B., Speaker's Secretary, House of Commons. Professor Leszek Karzystov Borisiewicz, Professor of Medicine, University of Wales. For services to medical research and education. Stanley William Clark, CBE, for services to the community in Staffordshire. Ronald Cohen, Chairman, Apax Partners and Company, for services to the venture capital industry. Thomas Daniel Courtenay, actor, for services to drama. Edward Michael Crewe, QPM, Chief Constable, West Midlands Police, for services to the police. Robert Paul Culpin, Managing Director, Budget and Public Finances, HM Treasury. Professor Christopher Thomas Evans, OBE, for services to the bioscience industry. Andrew William Foster, Controller, Audit Commission, for services to local government and to the NHS. Alastair MacLeod Fraser, CB, QC, for services to the criminal justice system. Professor Christopher John Frayling, Rector and Vice Provost, Royal College of Art, for services to art and design education. Barry Trevor Jackson, Surgeon and President, Royal College of Surgeons, for services to training and education in surgery. David McMurtry, CBE, Chief Executive, Renishaw plc, for services to design and innovation. Duncan Michael, Chairman of Trustees of Arup Partnership, for services to engineering and construction. Patrick Alfred Caldwell Moore, CBE, for services to the popularization of science and to broadcasting. John Orr, OBE, QPM, Chief Constable, Strathclyde Police, for services to the police. Thomas John Parker, Group Chairman, Babcock International, for services to the defense and shipbuilding industries. Charles Pollard, QPM, Chief Constable, Thames Valley Police, for services to the police. Stephen Jeffrey Redgrave, CBE, for services to rowing. Peter Levin Schaffer, CBE, Playwright, for services to drama. Professor Christopher Hubert Llewellyn-Smith, FRS, Provost and President, University College London, for services to particle physics. John Edward Solston, FRS, lately Director, Sanger Centre, for services to genome research. Professor Christopher John White, CVO, for services to art history. David Martin Brown, for services to British industry. Dr. Anthony John Francis O'Reilly, for long and distinguished service to Northern Ireland. Order of the Bath, Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Bath GCB. Air Chief Marshal Sir Peter Squire, KCB, DFC, AFC, ADC, Royal Air Force. Sir Richard Thomas James Wilson, KCB, Secretary of the Cabinet and Head of the Home Civil Service. Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath KCB. Lieutenant General Timothy John Granville Chapman, CBE, late Royal Regiment of Artillery. Air Marshal Malcolm David Pledger, OBE, AFC, Royal Air Force. Roger Tustin Jackling, CB, CBE, Second Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Defense. Christopher William Kelly, Permanent Secretary, Department of Health. Companion of the Order of the Bath CB. Military Division. Rear Admiral John Chadwick. Rear Admiral Brian Benjamin Perrone. Major General Christopher George Callow, OBE, late Royal Army Medical Corps. Major General Andrew Peter Ridgway, CBE, late Royal Tank Regiment. Major General Timothy John Sullivan, CBE, late the Blues and Royals. Air Vice Marshal Stephen Mark Nishal, CBE, AFC, Royal Air Force. Air Vice Marshal David Miller Niven, CBE, Royal Air Force. Civil Division. Donald Brereton, Director, Department of Social Security. Paul Britton, Deputy Head, Economic and Domestic Secretariat, Cabinet Office. Jonathan Stephen Cunliffe, Director, Monetary Policy and International Finance Directorate, HM Treasury. Philip John Davis, Parliamentary Counsel, Office of the Parliamentary Counsel. Richard Hillier, Director of Resources and Planning, Health and Safety Executive, Department of the Environment, Transport and the Regions. William Alexander Jeffrey, Political Director, Northern Ireland Office. John Michael Legg, CMG, Principal Establishment Officer, Ministry of Defense. David Robert Ritchie, Regional Director, Government Office for the West Midlands. Rosalind Mrs. Wright, Director, Serious Fraud Office. Order of St. Michael and St. George. Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. Michael and St. George GCMG. Sir Peter John Gooden, KCMG. Permanent Representative, Ukdal NATO, Brussels. Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George KCMG. Dr. Arthur Richard Jolly. For long and distinguished service to international development. Derek John Plumbley, CMG, HM, Ambassador, Riyadh. Nigel Elton Shanewold, CMG, Permanent Representative, Ukrep, Brussels. The Right Reverend Simon Barrington Ward, Prelate, Order of St. Michael and St. George. Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George CMG. Andrew John Fraser, lately Chief Executive, Invest UK, Department of Trade and Industry. John David Good Isherwood. For services to Oxfam. Peter Humphreys Kent. For services to Anglo-Taiwanese trade. Patrick John Essel, Director and Head, International Environmental Law Division, Department of the Environment, Transport, and the Regions. Miss Alison Judith Kirtley Bales, HM, Ambassador, Helsinki. Anthony Russell Brenton, Director, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Andrew Thomas Kahn, lately Chef de Cabinet, European Commission. Professor Ivor Norman Richard Davies, for services to Central European history. Miss Caroline Myfanwy Tange Elmes, HM, Ambassador, Luanda. Professor Michael Lafer, for services to UK Southeast Asian relations. Helen Makesner Mrs. Jack Thornton, Regional Director Central Europe, British Council. John MacLeod Scarlett, OBE Councillor, Foreign and Commonwealth OIS. Andrew William Graham Summers, for promotion of the excellence of UK design internationally. Derek James Alexander Taylor, for services to UK Mauritius trade. Philip Lloyd Thomas, lately HM, Consul General, Dusseldorf. Jeremy Walter Thorpe, HM, Ambassador, Bogota. Royal Victorian Order. Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order GCVO. Sir Brian Henry McGrath, KCVO. Lately Treasurer to Duke of Edinburgh. Knight Commander of the Royal Victorian Order KCVO. Vice Admiral Sir James Lamb Weatherall, KBE, Marshal of the Diplomatic Corps. Commander of the Royal Victorian Order CVO. Fiona Violet, Lady Aird, LVO, Lady-in-Waiting to Princess Margaret, Countess of Snowdon. Captain Robert Neil Blair, LVO, Royal Navy, Private Secretary to Duke of York and Princess Alexandra, the Honourable Lady Ogilvy. John Francis Jarvis, CBE, lately Chairman of the Trading Board, Prince's Trust. Peter Hugh Trevor Mimpress, Member of Council, the Prince's Trust. The Lady Angela Mary Rose Oswald, LVO, Lady-in-Waiting to Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother. Lieutenant of the Royal Victorian Order LVO. Eric Percival Carr, lately Honorary Treasurer and Trustee of the Prince Philip Trust Fund for the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. Miss Sandra Iris Henney, lately Press Secretary to the Prince of Wales. Miss Rachel N. Wells, MVO, Assistant Secretary, Central Chancery of the Orders of Knighthood. Member of the Royal Victorian Order MVO. Michael William Burke, Financial Controller, Property Services and Royal Travel, Royal Household. Patrick Stanley Michael Coles, Administrator, Western Provident Association. Sergeant Paul Leslie Crisp, Royalty Protection Department, Metropolitan Police. Sergeant Derek Victor Cross, Royalty Protection Department, Metropolitan Police. Alison Sharion Patricia Derrett, Assistant Registrar, Royal Archives, Royal Household. Michael David Fawcett, Personal Consultant to the Prince of Wales. Norma, Mrs. Gardiner, lately Assistant Secretary to the Lieutenant Governor of Guernsey. Peter John Godwin, Deputy Property Manager, Windsor Castle. Inspector Charles James John Goodsmith, lately Royalty Protection Department, Metropolitan Police. Roger Francis Tollemache Halliday, Land Steward, Western District, Duchy of Cornwall. Elizabeth Jill, Mrs. Kelsey, Assistant Registrar, Royal Archives, Royal Household. Graham John Laywood, lately Building Surveyor, Duchy of Cornwall. The Honourable Mary Yull Mackay, lately Personal Assistant to the Commonwealth Secretary-General. Sister Catherine Teresa O'Donnell, Nursing Sister, Buckingham Palace. Alexandra Shand, Mrs. Pettifer, for services to the Prince of Wales. Mary Elizabeth, Mrs. Smith. Miss Dorothy Kathleen N. Woolridge, Personal Assistant to the Governor-General of Australia. Bar to the Royal Victorian Medal Silver RVM. Christopher Frederick Biggs, RVM, Foreman. David Hugh Farrow, RVM, Tractor Driver, Sandringham Estate. Anthony Vernon Parnell, RVM, Foreman, Sandringham House. John Sadler, RVM, Motor Mechanic, Sandringham Estate. Royal Victorian Medal Silver RVM. Gerald Sean Alexander, Assistant Storekeeper, Crown Estate, Windsor. Michael Stanley Ashton, Craftsman Fitter, Crown Estate, Windsor. Constable Harold William Chappell, Royalty Protection Department, Metropolitan Police. John William Christian, Yeoman Bedgoer, the Queen's Bodyguard of the Yeomen of the Guard. Peter Donald, Works Department, Balmoral Estate. Corporal of Horse Kenneth Reginald Freeman, the Queen's Orderly. Stephen Richard Frohawk. Constable Stanley Highmore, Royalty Protection Department, Metropolitan Police. Ian Lawrence King, lately Pipe Major to Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother. Ian Cooper Masson, Forestry Department, Balmoral Estate. Gerald Andrew Morris, lately Showground Manager, Royal Windsor Horse Show. Graham Paul Richards, Chef to Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother. Ronald John Smith, Works Supervisor, Mechanical and Engineering Property Services, Buckingham Palace. Roger John Tyack, Divisional Sergeant Major, the Queen's Bodyguard of the Yeomen of the Guard. Dennis Thomas Williams, Messenger Sergeant Major, the Queen's Bodyguard of the Yeomen of the Guard. Order of the Companions of Honor CA. Sir Harrison Birtwistle, Composer. For services to music. David Paul Schofield, CBE, Actor. For services to drama. Order of the British Empire. Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire DBE. Miss Jill Ellison, Nursing Director, Birmingham Heartlands and Solihull NHS Trust. For services to nursing. Miss Jean Else, Head Teacher, Whalley Range High School, Manchester. For services to education, honor revoked in February 2011. Miss Sharon Hollows, Head Teacher, Calverton Primary School, Newham, London. For services to education. Miss Thea King, Mrs. Thurston King, OBE, clarinetist. For services to music. Ms. Sally N. Vickers Powell, Member and Deputy Executive Mayor, London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham. For services to London and to local government. Mary Mrs. Richardson, lately Principal, Convent of Jesus and Mary Language College, Brent. For services to education. Miss Janet Olive Trotter, OBE, Director, Cheltenham and Gloucester College of Higher Education. For services to higher education. Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire KBE. Vice Admiral Fabian Michael Malbin. Commanders of the Order of the British Empire CBE. Military Division Navy Commodore Adrian James Johns, Royal Navy. Surgeon Captain Michael Athol Farquharson Roberts, Royal Navy. Commodore Malcolm Stephen Williams, Royal Navy. Army Colonel Michael John Dent, MBE 503,659, late Royal Corps of Signals. Brigadier Christopher Michael Stairn 495,237, late the Royal Logistic Corps. Air Force Air Commodore Ronald Cook, Royal Air Force. Air Commodore Raymond James Horwood, OBE, Royal Air Force. Group Captain John William White, Royal Air Force. Civil Division Miss Jennifer Abramsky, Director, BBC Radio and Music. For services to news and radio broadcasting. Sidney Edmund Jocelyn Ackland, Actor. For services to drama. Mabubuddin Ahmad, Chair, Millet Asian Housing Association. For services to the community in South London. George Haylock Almond, MBE-DL, County Fire Officer and Chief Executive, Greater Manchester County Fire Service. For services to the fire service. Richard John William Alston, Choreographer and Artistic Director, The Place and Richard Alston Dance Company. For services to dance. Colin Angus Barnes, Non-Executive Director, British Airways. For services to aviation. John Beecham. For services to the chemical industry. Godfrey Gilbert Bevan, Director, Energy Technologies, Department of Trade and Industry. Professor Kenneth George Bynmore, Director, Essex Centre for Economic Learning and Social Evolution. For services to social science. Robin Michael Black, Chemist, Defense Evaluation and Research Agency, Ministry of Defense. Julian Blogg, Chief Executive, Ultra Electronics. For services to the defense and aerospace industries. James Everett Brathwaite, Chairman, Business Link Sussex. For services to the economy in Sussex. John Stuart Bridgman, TD, DL, lately Director General of Fair Trading. For services to consumers. Elizabeth Jane, Mrs. Brooks, lately Executive Director, Dyslexia Institute. For services to education. Alan Roy Brown, Director for Scotland Employment Service, Department for Education and Employment. John Richard Browning, lately Managing Director, Bristol Water Holdings plc, for services to the water industry. Ian James Graham Bryce, lately Principal and Vice-Chancellor, University of Dundee, for services to higher education and to research. Professor Graham Bulfield, Director and Chief Executive, Roslin Institute, Edinburgh, for services to animal genetics. Patrick Mowbray Cadle, Keeper of the Records of Scotland, Scottish Executive. Clive Thomas Kane, Quality Director, Defence Estates, Ministry of Defence. Felicity, Mrs. Clarkson, lately Head, Young Offenders Group, Home Office. Geoffrey Copeman D.L., Vice Chairman, Eastern Counties Newspapers Group, for services to the newspaper industry. Patricia and Mrs. Cross, Head Teacher, St. John's Church of England Primary School, Huddersfield, West Yorkshire, for services to education. Andrew Cuby, for services to business and the community in Scotland. Geoffrey Court Dart, Chief Executive, for services to the Navy, Army, and Air Force Institutes. John Richard Christopher Davies, Director of Social Services, Somerset County Council, for services to social services. Professor Nicholas Edward Day, MRC Research Professor, for services to statistics and epidemiology underpinning cancer biology. Edward Ralph Dexter, for services to cricket. Professor Patrick Joseph Dowling, Vice-Chancellor, Chief Executive, University of Surrey, for services to business/academic links. Martin Drew Drury, for services to conservation. Ms. Helen Edwards, Member New Deal Task Force, for services to unemployed people and ex-offenders. Jonathan David Edwards, MBE, for services to athletics. Elwyn Owen Morris Iledge, Chairman, Financial Reporting Advisory Board, for services to financial accounting. Ursula Askam Fanthorpe, Poet, for services to literature. Ms. Amanda Jane Finlay, Director, Public and Private Rights, Directorate, Lord Chancellor's Department. Professor Michael Richard Daniel Foote, TD, Historian, for services to the official history of the SOE. Edward Patrick Gallagher, Chief Executive, Environment Agency, for services to the environment. Ian James Galloway, Chairman, Scott Beef Limited, for services to the beef industry. William Dennis Glass, for public service. Alexander Munsey Gold, Director, Scottish Chambers of Commerce, for services to industry and business. Ms. Wilhelmina Barnes Graham, Painter, for services to art. Professor Andrew Graves, for services to competitiveness in industry. Professor David Lawrence Hamblin, Chairman, Greater Glasgow Health Board and Emeritus Professor of Orthopaedic Surgery, University of Glasgow, for services to the NHS. Rosemary Catherine, Mrs. Hamilton, for services to higher education. Margaret, Mrs. Harrison, OBE, for services to Home Start and to support for families. Professor John Lawrence Head, Member, Nuclear Safety Advisory Committee, for services to nuclear safety. Jacqueline, Mrs. Henderson, Chief Executive, National Council, Training and Enterprise Council, for services to education and training. Miss Bronwyn Hill, Divisional Manager, Department of the Environment, Transport, and the Regions. Miss Judith Eileen Hill, for Public Service. Ralph Noel Hodge, Chairman, Enron Europe Limited, for services to the power generation and gas industries. Michael Jolly, Chairman, Tussauds Group, for services to tourism. Robert Wynne Jones, Chair, East Midlands Regional Assembly, for services to local government in the East Midlands. William Kenwright, Stage and Film Producer, for services to the theatre and to film. Nicholas Roger Kenyon, Controller, BBC Proms, Live Events and TV Classical Music. For services to music and Millennium Broadcasting. Professor Rudolph Ewald Klein, Emeritus Professor of Social Policy, University of Bath. For services to Health Services Research. Richard Cornicky, Head, Performance and Strategic Management Unit, Policing and Crime Reduction Group, Home Office. Professor Parveen June Kumer, Professor of Clinical Medical Education, Consultant Physician and Gastroenterologist, Barts and the London NHS Trust. For services to medicine. Professor Lance Edward Lanyon, Principal, Royal Veterinary College. For services to veterinary education and science. Richard Neville Lay, lately Chairman DTZ. For services to the property profession. Richard Charles Leese, Leader, Manchester City Council. For services to the community and to local government. Thomas William Anthony Little, lately Chief Executive, Veterinary Laboratories Agency, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. Douglas Brian Liversidge, lately Project Director, Regional Innovation Strategy. For services to industry. Professor N. Lomas Lodes, Professor of Divinity, University of Durham. For services to theology. Geoffrey Lodes, Chair, Norfolk and Waveney Training and Enterprise Council. For services to training and enterprise. Thomas William Logan, Collector, H.M. Board of Customs and Excise. Michael John Lowe, JPDL, President, Shropshire Chamber of Commerce, Training and Enterprise. For services to education, training and business support. Colin Mackay, lately President, Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow. For services to medicine. John Mackinson, Finance Director, Pearson Group. For services to public sector productivity. Professor David Melville, Chief Executive, Further Education Funding Council. For services to education. Adrian Montague, Deputy Chairman, Partnerships UK. For services to the Private Finance Initiative. Richard Louis Ormond, lately Director, National Maritime Museum. For services to museums. MS and Elizabeth Owers, Director, Justice. For services to human rights. Susan Marie, Mrs. Page, Chief Executive, Northumbria Healthcare NHS Trust. For services to the NHS. Chess. Graham Edward Parkinson. For services to the Stipendiary Bench and to the administration of justice. Geraldine, Mrs. Peacock, Chair, Association of Chief Executives of Voluntary Organizations. For services to the voluntary sector. Matthew Pinsent, MBE, for services to rowing. John Pope, Chief Executive, North West London Hospitals NHS Trust. For services to health care. Professor Michael Alexander Pringle, Chairman of Council, Royal College of General Practitioners. For services to medicine. Barry Quirk, Chief Executive, London Borough of Lewisham. For services to local government. Professor David William Rind, Vice Chancellor, City University. For services to geographical and social sciences. Professor Michael Adrian Richards, National Cancer Director. For services to cancer and palliative medicine. Miss Joan Rogers, Singer. For services to opera. David John Rowe, lately Head, Financial Regulatory Reform Team, HM Treasury. Hazel Joy, Mrs. Rowlands, Nutrition Nurse Specialist, Luton and Dunstable Hospital, Bedfordshire. For services to nursing. John Francis Rourke, Principal, St. Charles Catholic Sixth Form College, Kensington and Chelsea, London. For services to education. John Scampion, Social Fund Commissioner for Great Britain and Northern Ireland. For services to the Independent Review Service. Julian Robert Seymour. For public services: Professor Wilson Sibbett, Professor of Physics and Director of Research, University of St Andrews. For services to science: Douglas Sinclair, Chief Executive, Fife Council. For services to local government: Christopher Henry Sporborg. For charitable services: Miss Jane Vivian Stokes, Treasury Legal Advisor, Treasury Solicitors Department. David Ivor Macpherson Sutherland, Registrar, General Teaching Council for Scotland. For services to education: Edward Nicholas Tate, lately Chief Executive, Qualifications and Curriculum Authority. For services to education and to training: Robert Sidney Tinston, Regional Director, NHS Executive, Department of Health. Miss Bridget Ellen Toll, Chief Guide and UK and Commonwealth Chief Commissioner. For services to guiding: Patricia and Troop, Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Department of Health. Robin Anthony Vincent, Circuit Administrator, Court Service Agency, Lord Chancellor's Department. Robert Ward, Senior Civil Servant Legal, Ministry of Defense. Miss Faye Weldon, Author. For services to literature: Professor Geoffrey Whittington. For services to the Accounting Standards Board: Michael James Wilford, Architect. For services to architecture: Miss Susan Margaret Wilson. For services to economic development in North East England: Diplomatic and Overseas List Michael Harrington Dale. For services to British commercial interests North America: Lyndon Rees Evans. For services to Accelerator Physics: the Honourable Mr. Justice Gerald Michael Godfrey, lately Justice of Appeal, Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Eric Edward Houghton. For services to British charitable interests overseas: John Alexander Kennedy. For services to UK Latin American trade: the Honourable Mr. Justice Henry Denys Lytton, OBEQC, lately Judge, Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Leopold Nathaniel Mills Roman II. For public service: Bermuda: Michael Shears. For services to international trade and trade development strategy: Liubo Franjo Cirque. For services to the promotion of democracy in Central and Eastern Europe: Officers of the Order of the British Empire OBE. Military Division Navy Commander Christopher Alcock. Royal Navy: Captain Leslie Michael Coupland, Royal Fleet Auxiliary. Captain John Kenneth Covell, Royal Navy. Commander Peter Norman Payne Hanlon, Royal Navy. Commander Michael Dennis Jones, Royal Navy. Commander Robert Nairn, Royal Navy. Army Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Harold Clough 493,696, the Royal Logistic Corps. Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Eldred Comport, TD 505,386, Royal Regiment of Artillery Territorial Army. Lieutenant Colonel Douglas Eric Cook 510,299, the Royal Logistic Corps. Lieutenant Colonel Martin Charles Frostick 499,701, Corps of Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Louis Hall, MBE 504,459, the Royal Gloucestershire, Berkshire and Wiltshire Regiment. Colonel John Richard Hennessy 519,305, late Corps of Royal Engineers Territorial Army. Colonel Catherine Jane Kitchener 503,280, late Adjutant General's Corps Staff and Personnel Support. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Dutton Mason 503,873, the Parachute Regiment. Colonel Philip Dermot McEvoy 514,357, late Adjutant General's Corps Army Legal Services. Lieutenant Colonel John Adrian Riss 481,851, Corps of Royal Engineers. Lieutenant Colonel David Ian Aubrey Spackman, 480,402, the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. Lieutenant Colonel Robert William Hamilton Sutcliffe, 509,220, the Royal Yeomanry Territorial Army. Air Force Wing Commander David Clive Coombs, 8,023,560, Royal Air Force. Wing Commander Barbara Cooper, 8,032,068, Royal Air Force. Wing Commander Martin James Engwell, 4,231,539, Royal Air Force. Wing Commander Mark Adrian Jeffrey, 2,630,144, Royal Air Force. Wing Commander Stephen Long, 5,205,113, Royal Air Force. Wing Commander Christopher Andrew Murray, 8,108,403, Royal Air Force. Wing Commander Paul Nash, 5,202,785, Royal Air Force. Wing Commander Jonathan Colton Rigby, 5,205,228, Royal Air Force. Overseas Lieutenant Colonel Patrick McIntyre Outerbridge, ED, the Bermuda Regiment. Civil Division Hazel, Mrs. Abbott, lately head teacher, for services to education. Richard John Adams, for services to the promotion of ethical trading. David Adlington, Pay Band F, Lord Chancellor's Department. Professor Peter John Aguette, for services to the Advisory Committee on Novel Foods and Processes. Borag, Mrs. Alexander, Director, Equal Opportunities Commission, Scotland, for services to equal opportunities. Captain Colin George Allen, for services to the National Historic Ships Committee. Eileen, Mrs. Anderson, Head Teacher, Carrickhofa Primary School, Powys, for services to education. Miss Rowena Arshad, Director, Centre for Education for Racial Equality in Scotland, for services to race equality. Alison, Mrs. Austin, Head, Environmental and Technical Communications, J. Sainsbury plc, for services to the environment and to sustainable development. David Brian Baker, Archaeologist, for services to the conservation of the historic environment. John Joseph Balance, Project Manager, Welcome Wing, for services to the Science Museum. Maureen, Mrs. Bampton, Head Teacher, Erdig Nursery School, North Wales, for services to education. Ms. Caroline Mary Barker, for services to Viacom and to small and medium businesses in China. Murray Barnes, TD, for public service. William Jeffrey Bartlett, lately Director General, Paper Federation of Great Britain, for services to the paper industry. John Michael Beaumont Senior, for services to the community on Sark. Elaine, Mrs. Bedford, lately Operations Director, English Tourist Board, for services to tourism. Andrew Collings Beer, Principal Establishment and Finance Officer, Government Actuaries Department. Susankar Awath Bihari, JP, for services to the community in Wolverhampton, West Midlands. Miss Flola Benjamin, Chairman, BAFTA, for services to broadcasting. Donald John Bennett, lately Chairman, Scottish Rights of Way Society, for services to countryside and mountain access. David Hywell Bennett, lately Principal, for services to education. Stephen Hamilton Best, for services to industry, enterprise, education and training in Gwent. Professor Helen Bevan, Redesign Director, National Patients Access Team, for services to the NHS. Vimal Kanti Balmick, Consultant Physician, for services to geriatric medicine in Wales. Peter Giles Biddle, Principal, PG Biddle Arboricultural Consultants, For services to arboriculture and to the environment, Miss Dorothy Birchall. For services to the League for the Exchange of Commonwealth Teachers, Matthew Christopher Bourne, choreographer and artistic director, Adventures in Motion Pictures. For services to dance, Professor Brian Arthur Bridges. For services to the cellular effects of radiation, Jeffrey Brindle, lately Grade 7, Home Office. Captain James Armour Brown, R.D. for services to the Order of St. John in Scotland. John Logan Ian Brown, Officer in Charge, H.M. Board of Inland Revenue. Pearl Holmes Brown, Chief Executive, Riverside Community Health Care Trust. For services to healthcare in London, Michael John Bunce, lately Executive Director, Royal Television Society. For services to broadcasting, Michael Howard Butler. For services to the Mine Workers Pension Scheme, Ian Charles Grenadine. For services to the Institute of Logistics and Transport, Jacqueline Mrs. Cannon, Director of Research, Construction Forecasting and Research Limited. For services to the construction industry and to the housing sector, Professor Barry Carpenter, Principal/Chief Executive, Sunfield Independent Special School. For services to children with special educational needs, Helen Mrs. Carroll, Special Needs Midwife, South Manchester NHS Trust. For services to homeless women, Miss Sally Cartwright, Publishing Director, Hello. For services to the Periodical Publishers Association, Andrew John Cash, Chief Executive, Northern General Hospital NHS Trust. For services to health care, Sylvia Christine, Mrs. Cave, National Vice President, Girls Brigade in England and Wales. For services to young people, William Henry Reimer Caton, Chief Executive, Alzheimer's Society. For services to people with dementia, Frederick Chambers, J.P. For services to the Royal Naval Association, Reginald Chapman, Principal, Blackpool and the Field College, Lancashire. For services to further education, Rakesh Chopra, General Medical Practitioner, Northumberland. For services to health care, Victor George Spencer, Viscount Churchill. For services to the Church of England's Central Board of Finance, Andrew George Clark, Nuclear Safety and Quality Director, Devonport Management Limited. For services to the defense industry, Professor Leslie Arthur Clark, Professor of Structural Engineering, University of Birmingham. For services to structural engineering research, John Jeremy Cockburn, Operations Director, Canada B Systems. For services to the defense industry, Margaret McFarlane, Mrs. Collinson, J.P. For services to agriculture and to the community, Callum Munro Colvin, artist/photographer. For services to the visual arts, Frederick Comer, Consultant, RSBCA. For services to animal welfare, Timothy John Connolly, Chairman, Connolly Leather Limited. For services to the leather tanning industry, Marilyn and Mrs. Cook, H.M. Inspector of Schools, Office for Standards in Education. For services to education, particularly the improvement of schools, John Cullen. For services to dentistry, Alan Cunningham, Grade B2, Ministry of Defense. Professor Charles David Curtis, Chairman, Radioactive Waste Management Advisory Committee. For services to environmental protection, Professor Stanley Dagg. For services to waste management, Margaret Francis, Mrs. Dalton, Farmer. For services to agriculture and to the community in Ceredigion, Amin Dalvi, Chief Executive, Ujima Housing Association. For services to housing, Jim Davidson, Entertainer. For charitable services, Professor Bledin Price Davis, lately Director, Personal Social Services Research Unit. For services to social science and policy, Richard Gordon Derwent, Grade 1B, Meteorological Office, Ministry of Defense. Margaret Watt, Mrs. Dick. For services to the Institute of Chartered Foresters. Thomas Andrew Divers, Chief Executive, Lanarkshire Health Board. For services to the NHS in Scotland. Geoffrey Arnold Dobson. For services to the Association of Chief Officers of Probation. Thomas Bernard Docherty, General Medical Practitioner, County Durham. For services to health care. Robert Dover, Grade 6, Department of Social Security. John Allen Drew, Branch Crown Prosecutor, Crown Prosecution Service. Angus Dunphy, Head Teacher, Fitzalan High School, Cardiff. For services to education. John Charles Neville Dickhoff, Director of Catering, Metropolitan Police Service. For services to the police and the hospitality industry. Geoffrey Morton Edmondson. For services to schools sport. Anne, Mrs. Elliott, Head Teacher, Horton Grange County First School, Blyth, Northumberland. For services to education. Anita Georgina, Mrs. English, Director, Thames Valley Enterprise Board. For services to training for disadvantaged people. David Marion Evans, lately General Secretary, Prison Officers Association. For services to employment relations. Dennis Henry Evans, Grade 7, Home Office. Gillian, Mrs. Farnsworth, District Manager, Employment Service, Department for Education and Employment. Robert Thomas Ferris. For services to the fishing industry. Robert William Foote, Grade B2, Ministry of Defense. Clara, Mrs. Freeman, Chairman, Opportunity Now. For services to women in the workforce. Mary Ellen Eugenie, Lady Fretwell, Chairman, Passports for Pets. For services to pet owners and to animal welfare. Professor Erwin Gabafuller, FRS, for services to physics. Denise Patterson Galway. For services to the harbor industry. Ian Malcolm Gardiner, Deputy Director General, National Farmers Union. For services to agriculture. Alan Garner, author. For services to children's literature. Stephen Cockayne Gibbs, member, Deer Commission for Scotland. For services to deer management. John Martin Gill, Chief Scientist, RNIV. For services to information technology for partially sighted people. Professor Lynn Faith Gladden. For services to chemistry. Donald Grant, QFSM. Commandant, Scottish Fire Service Training School. Roger Greenaway, composer. For services to popular music. Miss Patricia Mary Greenhalgh. For services to evidence-based medical care. Miss Miriam Greenwood, D.L., Director and Chief Operating Officer, British Linen Advisors. For services to corporate finance. Peter Leslie Griffin. For services to school governors in Cardiff. Lawrence David Brewer, Member, Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs and Scottish Advisory Committee on Drug Misuse. For services to public health medicine. Peter Gurney, Officer in Charge, HM Board of Inland Revenue. Miss Elizabeth N. Gingell, Head of Division, Health Directorate, Health and Safety Executive, Department of the Environment, Transport, and the Regions. David John Haynes, Managing Director, Warwickshire Careers Service. For services to young people and to employers. Miss Barbara N. Hacken, Chief Executive, Bradford South and West Primary Care Trust. For services to the NHS. Chess. Ian Hamer, J.P., Chair, Air Transport Users Council. For services to air travelers. David John Harper, MVO, Chief Fire Officer, Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service. For services to the fire service. Keith William Harwood, Grade 7, Department of the Environment, Transport, and the Regions. Reetha Rachel, Mrs. Hassan. For services to the community. Ian Hay, Chief Executive, Scottish Association of Master Bakers. For services to vocational education and training. Maurice Eugene Healy, Chairman, Insurance Ombudsman Bureau Council. For services to consumers. Miss Catherine N. Henderson, Principal Auditor, National Audit Office. Harold Derek Hepworth, J.P. for services to the administration of justice in Sheffield, South Yorkshire. Derek John Higgins. For services to the community, especially young people in Essex. David Hurst, Engineering Director, Wardle Stories. For services to the defense industry. Miss Claire Allison Holder, Chief Executive, Notting Hill Carnival Trust. For services to the arts. Ms. Diana Holland, National Organizer for Women, Race and Equalities, TIGWU. For services to equal opportunities in employment. Martin Hopkins. For services to sports broadcasting. Graham Wallis John Hoskin, Investigation Officer, HM Board of Inland Revenue. Miss Ruth Mary Hussey, Director of Public Health, Liverpool Health Authority. For services to health care. Jocelyn Elizabeth Ann Imrai. For services to the NHS in Scotland, especially cervical screening. Professor Eric William Ives. For services to history and to the University of Birmingham. Thomas Owen Leslie Jenkins, Secretary, European Union and International Relations, Trades Union Congress. For services to employment relations in the European Union. Peter Simon Jenkinson, Director, Walsall Museums and the New Art Gallery. For services to museums and to art. David Rowland John. For services to education. Gail Beverly, Mrs. Johnson, Family Center Coordinator, Whidden Primary School, Gloucester. For services to education. Londonry Wynne Jones, Chief Executive, Institute of Physics. For services to the defense industry. Christine Jane, Mrs. Jones. For services to the oil and gas industry. Timothy John Cooper Jones, Project Director, Unilever. For services to the food industry. Trevor Chave Jones, lately Grade Bone, Ministry of Defense. Peter John Jordan, Chairman, Pilgrim NHS Trust. For services to the community in Boston, Lincolnshire. Michael John David Keatinge, Head, Architecture Branch, Department for Culture, Media and Sport. Linda Mrs. Keith, Head of Private Office, NHS Executive, Department of Health. James Keith Kilby. For services to Anglo-Italian relations through the Monte San Martino Trust. Joan Elizabeth Lane. For services to the British Red Cross Society in Herefordshire and Worcestershire. Brian Lamb. For services to disabled people. Charles Peter Lamb, lately Grade 7, Department for Education and Employment. Gerald Lanchin. For services to consumers. Jonathan William Miles Lane. For services to water aid. John Jeffrey Lavin, Deputy Director, Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. For services to conservation through the Millennium Seed Bank Project. Miss Susan Lawley. For services to television and radio broadcasting. Shek Young Lee. For services to the Chinese community. Miss Denise Louise, MBE, for services to athletics. Angus Roderick Mackay, Unit Manager, Orchard Lodge, London. For services to young offenders. Donald Mackenzie Mackay, Member, Cumhail Nan Eilean Sire. For services to local government and to the community in the Western Isles. Ms. Susan McQueen. For services to infection control nursing at Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children, London and overseas. Robert James Maggi. For services to the food and drink industry. Ms. Stella Manzi, Chief Executive, West Berkshire Council. For services to local government. Douglas Brown MacArthur. For services to the Radio Advertising Bureau. Andrew McCulley, Divisional Manager, Department for Education and Employment. William Duncan McInnes, NE, for services to youth basketball. Ian McKinley, Consultant Pediatric Neurologist, for services to disabled people. Veronica Beverly, Mrs. McLaughlin, Head Teacher, Leaf Walk Primary School, Edinburgh, for services to primary education. Alan McQuillan, for services to the police. Adrian Metcalf, for services to sport. Revel John Mitchell, for charitable services on Guernsey and overseas. Alan Francis Morgan, for services to the Welsh Development Agency. Raymond James Mullen, for services to education. Petronella Joy, Mrs. M. Wasson-Jube, Deputy Director of Nursing, Heatherwood and Wexham Park Hospitals, Berkshire, for services to ethnic minority patients and staff. Raymond Nash, District Manager, Thameside Employment Service, Department for Education and Employment. Elizabeth, Mrs. Dunbar Nasmith, for services to the Soldiers, Sailors and Airmen's Families Association in Moray and Banffshire. Richard John Nelmies, Professor, University of Edinburgh, Senior Visiting Fellow at CLRC, for services to science. Michael Noble, for services to research into poverty and deprivation. Bernard Victor Norgan, for charitable services. Sister Helen O'Dwyer, for services to education. Patrick Laurie Oakey, for services to legislation. John Oldham, General Medical Practitioner, Glossop, for services to patient services. Winifred Kitt, Mrs. Oliver D.L., Member Mole Valley District Council, for services to business and to the environment in Surrey. Marion, Mrs. Pagani, for services to the Children's Hearing System in Glasgow. Sarah Lamb, Mrs. Parkin, Director, Forum for the Future, for services to education and to sustainable development. Joseph Philip Parkinson, J.P., for services to the administration of justice and blind people in Leicestershire. Jackie, Mrs. Peacock, for services to the Brent Private Tenants' Rights Group, London. Ms. Patricia Pierce, lately Director, Careers Service, University of Westminster, for services to careers education. Robert Pendlebury, Chairman, Northumbria Tourist Board, for services to tourism. Miss Jean Frances Perkins, for services to netball. Michael Charles Petch, Chairman, Advisory Panel on Cardiac Conditions and Driving, for services to road safety. Christopher Frank Rendall Potter, Head Teacher, Old Swinford Hospital School, Stourbridge, West Midlands, for services to education. Miss Anne Margaret Powell, for services to conservation and to freshwater fisheries. David Elwyn Powell, lately Grade 7, National Assembly for Wales. John Henry Rowland Ramsay, for services to Macmillan Cancer Relief and to the hospice movement in North East England. Ms. Jane Margaret Rapley, Dean, Fashion and Textiles, Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design, London Institute, for services to higher education. Michael David Maxwell Rea, for services to education. Miss Dale Reed, for services to women's golf. Professor John Lowe Reed, for services to biomedical science. Kenneth Ernest Reed, for services to sport. William Martin Ritchie, for services to computer technology and business in Scotland. Miss Erica Roberts, Director, Millennium Awards, for services to the Millennium Commission. Anthony Charles Robinson, Chief Executive, Small Firms Enterprise Development Initiative, for services to training and to small firms. Noel Rogers, National Chairman of Fundraising, for services to the Royal British Legion. Hilary Rolls, lately B2, Ministry of Defense. Miss Patricia Maria Rosario, Singer, for services to opera. Rex Rosario, Founder, Graphic plc, for services to the electronics industry. Anil Kumaruya, Director, Rengate Limited, for services to business in Manchester. Donald Rutherford, for services to rugby union football. David Joseph Seligman, for services to the community in Cardiff. Margaret Olivia, Mrs. Semple, for services to learning experience and arts education. James Reed Sewell, City Archivist, Corporation of London, for services to the City of London and to municipal archives. Kenneth Everett Shackleton, for services to the New Deal in Peterborough, Cambridgeshire. John David Roger Shore, Deputy Treasury Accountant, H.M. Treasury. The Very Reverend John Arthur Simpson, lately Dean of Canterbury, for services to the Church of England. Muriel, Mrs. Singleton, for services to pharmacy education and training. James Skinner, Chairman, Glasgow Community College Group, for services to further education and to the community. Professor Francis Jack Smith, for services to computer science. Gladys Isabella, Mrs. Smythe, T.D., for public service. Ian Thomas Snodgrass, for services to town and country planning in Renfrewshire. Professor Roy Archibald Joseph Spence, J.P., for services to the police. Miss Eileen and Patricia Stewart, Principal Crown Prosecutor, Crown Prosecution Service. Hazel, Mrs. Stuteley, Health Visitor, Falmouth, Cornwall, for services to the community. Rabbi Nachman Sudak, Principal, Lubavitch Youth Organization, for services to young people. Brian Ronald Thomas, Senior Group Leader, AWE Aldermaston, for services to the defense industry. John Hilton Thomas, Head Teacher, Wootton Bassett County Secondary School, Wiltshire, for services to education. Miss Beverly Thompson, Director of Race and Criminal Justice, NACRO, for services to race equality. David James Thompson, for services to education. Sheila, Mrs. Thorpe, Head of Center, Hillfields Early Excellence Center, Coventry, West Midlands, for services to education. Miss Mary Geraldine Titular, for services to education. Christine Elizabeth, Mrs. Tulloch, Assistant Director, HM Board of Inland Revenue. MS Julia Unwin, for services to the Housing Corporation. Professor Michael Barham Usher, Chief Scientist, Scottish Natural Heritage, for services to conservation science. Ramesh Kanjivala, for services to the Isha Foundation. Jane Mylander, Mrs. Wainwright, Director of Information Systems, House of Commons. Hugh Richard Walduck, J.P., D.L., for services to the community in London and Hertfordshire. Mary Marjorie, Mrs. Walker, Member, London Borough of Croydon, for services to the community. Miss Anne Frances Wallis, Assistant Director, Rough Sleepers Unit, Department of the Environment, Transport and the Regions. Jeffrey Martin Wanstall, Grade B2, Defense Evaluation and Research Agency, Ministry of Defense. Colin Warden, Chief Executive, Castle Maclellan Foods Limited, for services to the Scottish food industry. MS Jennifer Warren, for services to the encouragement of breastfeeding. Gerald Arthur Henry Wells, lately Grade 6, Veterinary Laboratories Agency, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. Peter Welsh, Director, UKIA, Downree, for services to the nuclear industry. Professor David Rex Westbury, Vice Principal, University of Birmingham, for services to higher education. Audrey Mrs. Westhead, Head Teacher, Chestnut Lodge Special School, Widneys, Cheshire, for services to children with special educational needs. Alan David Wilson, Senior Manager, Anti-Smuggling, HM Board of Customs and Excise. Frederick Thomas Wilson, QPM, for services to the Royal Air Forces Association in North East England. MS Judy Wilson, for services to healthcare. Michael John Wilson, Grade 6, Department for International Development. Jeffrey Moss Wolf, Managing Director, Micromap Limited, for services to innovation and business. Andrew Paul Kilding Wright, for services to architecture and the built heritage in Scotland. Kenneth Yard, lately Head, Technology Sectors Unit, Department of Trade and Industry. Professor Lola Young, Professor, Middlesex University, for services to British Black History. Mayor Mrs. Young, for services to young people. Diplomatic and Overseas List Georgina Teresa, Mrs. Ashworth, for services to international human rights. Geoffrey Frederick Bacon, for services to UK-Canadian relations. The Right Reverend Kenneth Lawrence Barham, for services to the communities of Central Africa. Sonia Wild, Mrs. Bicanic, for services to UK-Croatian cultural relations. Alan Christopher Brooks, First Secretary, British High Commission, Canberra. Nicholas John Baraston, for services to UK commercial interests in Hungary. Dr. Fiona Jean Ward Burslem, for services to healthcare in Pakistan. Christopher Seviak, for services to the promotion of democracy in Central Europe. Alan Richard Kirk Dixon, for service to the British community in Argentina. Dr. Michael David Downham, MBE, for services to the community, Sierra Leone. Michael Reginald Frost, lately First Secretary, Lagos. Professor Joseph Roger Carby Hall, for services to UK-Polish relations and international law. Professor Anthony David Harries, for services to the study of tuberculosis in Africa. Graham Peter Harris, MBE, Security Officer, British High Commission, Pretoria. Dr. John Hawkins, Acting Head of Finance, British Council Headquarters. Dr. Lynn Myfanwy Jones, for services to child psychology and mental health in war-affected areas of Central Europe. Ethel, Mrs. de Keyser, for services to human rights. Captain Mabry Salisbury Kirkconnell, MBE, JP, for public service, Cayman Islands. Irving Yi-Yin Koo, for services to British commercial interests, Hong Kong. And Azej Philip Krasowski, lately Assistant Director Development, UN Secretariat. Lee Sarah, Mrs. Levin, for services to international human rights. George Colin Magnus, for services to Chevening Scholarships in Hong Kong. Thomas Gregory Burns Maranan, for services to UK Spanish cultural relations. James Ray McCulloch, HM, Ambassador, Reykjavik. Michael McDowell, Senior Director, Overseas Development Council. Kenneth John Milband, for services to the local community in Nepal. Valerie Joy, Mrs. Mitchell, for services to the English-speaking Union. Dr. Alastair Neil Robertson Niven, Director Literature, British Council Headquarters. Miss Charlotte Tessa Rampling, for services to acting and UK-French cultural relations. Professor Vera Helen Rees, for services to healthcare in South Africa. Dr. Paul David Sayer, for services to veterinary medicine in Kenya. Sister Maria Laya Schwarzmuller, for services to leprosy relief in Tanzania. Dominic Kingsley Eason Scott, lately First Secretary Education Development, British High Commission, New Delhi. Michael Roger Pearson Smith, for services to British commercial interests in Argentina. Paul Stanislas, for services to British commercial interests in the United States of America. Patrick Stewart, for services to acting and the cinema. Maureen Patricia, Mrs. Stratford, for services to the mentally handicapped in Guangzhou, China. Dr. Reginald Brian Stratford, for services to the mentally handicapped in Guangzhou, China. David Martin Tate, for services to the promotion of British aviation interests in the United States of America. Dr. Robin Erskine Tattersall, for public service, British Virgin Islands. Michael Denys Alastair Terry, for services to human rights. Richard Paul Rainier Thompson, First Secretary, Foreign and Commonwealth OIS. Anthony True, for services to British commercial interests and the community, Abu Dhabi. John Watson, for services to British commercial interests in the United States of America. Alan James White, British consul locally engaged, Gothenburg, New Zealand. Cook Islands, Order of the British Empire. Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire, KBE. Dr. Pupuk Robati, OBE, for public and community service. Member of the Order of the British Empire, MBE. Archer Vivian Hosking, for services to telecommunications and the community. British Empire Medal, BM. William Catty Heather, for services to sports and the community. Moara, for services to education and the community. Barbados, Order of the British Empire. Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE. Michael Robert Clark, for service to the field of medicine. Alan David Grant Hutchinson, for service to manufacturing. Officer of the Order of the British Empire, CBE. Phyllis Austin Doreen, Mrs. Allen, for service to education. Harold Lloyd Vincent Griffith, for public service. Member of the Order of the British Empire, MB. Colin Olivier Leroy Dean, for service in the field of cricket. The Reverend Lawrence George Small, for service to religion and the public. Grenada, Order of the British Empire. Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OB. Father Claudius Mark Haynes, for service to religion. Raymond Anthony Smith, for public service. Member of the Order of the British Empire, MB. Sheila Mrs. Kumansingh, for service to teaching. Lawrence Lambert, for public service. British Empire Medal, BM. Stressman MacDonald Thomas, for services to the fishing industry. Papua New Guinea, Knight Bachelor. Peter Leslie Charles Barter, OBE, for public service. Robert John Sinclair, for service to business, community, and the country. Order of the British Empire. Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire, KBE. Sokander T. Jandra, MBE, for services to politics and the community. Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE. Napoleon Boyu Leosi, for services to the community. Officer of the Order of the British Empire, OB. Civil Division David Ango, for foreign service and services to industry and trade. Costa George Constantinou, for services to the community. Toby Seterki Davis, for services to education. The Honorable Fileman Tail and Bell, for services to politics and the community. Les Gavarananu, for service to the private sector. Hosea Tubarat, for service to the community and sports. Military Division Colonel Paul Dalla, for service to the Papua New Guinea Defence Force. Member of the Order of the British Empire, MB. Civil Division Joseph Martin Chow Sun Yao, for service to business and the community. Anna Bungtabu Mrs. Diuvia, for services to the community and women's affairs. Superintendent Charlie Ferrari, for service to the Papua New Guinea Correctional Service. Jamie Maxstone Graham, for public service. Pastor Yori Hebo, for services to religion. Simon Kenne, for service to Papua New Guinea Red Cross. MS Margaret Samai, for services to health and the public. Dr. Mark Salon, for service to education. Willie Togau, for public service. George Manuatelic, for service to the development of local music. Elena, Mrs. Tjandre Najra, for services to business and the community. Amanju Umalma, for service to education. Military Division Chief Warrant Officer Paul Mate, for services to the Papua New Guinea Defense Force. Imperial Service Order ISO. Ano Pala, for public service. British Empire Medal BM. Anyani Bao, for services to the Royal Papua New Guinea Constabulary. Human Dye, for services to politics. Emily, Mrs. David, for foreign service. Petrus Fongai, for public service. Samuel Francis, for service to the community. Kaigro Jean, for services to the community. Albert Sari Ivaraya, for services to the community. Elon Katem, for services to the community. Anthony Kevin, for public service. Sergeant Major Henry Tominge Levy, for services to the Papua New Guinea Correctional Service. Mean Mavara, for services to the community and religion. Tarato Nama, for services to the community. Matthias Noor, for services to religion. Thomas Ninji, for services to the community. Karara Ove, for services to the Health Department. Sergeant Reginald Panua, for services to the police. Wiggle Parr, for services to the community. The Reverend Riley Haywatha Sampson, for services to the community and religion. Herman Adan Sinioy, for services to education. Luck Tyndum, for services to the government. George Pukeler Wallow, for public service. John Alanakwan Yapley, for services to the government. Payakyauti, for service to the Eastern Highlands. St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Order of St. Michael and St. George. Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George CMG. Richard Walter Joachim, OBE, for public service. Order of the British Empire. Officer of the Order of the British Empire OBE. Martin James Edward Barnard, for service to the private sector. Kerwin Leslie Morris, for service to the fishing industry. Member of the Order of the British Empire MB. Major St. Clair Augustus Leacock, JP, for public service. Irma Agatha, Mrs. Norris, for services to teaching and the community. Alderic Wendell Wright, JP, for services to policing. Belize, Order of the British Empire. Commander of the Order of the British Empire CBE. John Louis Charles Crump, for services to the community. Officer of the Order of the British Empire OB. Brigadier General Robert Sidney Garsha, for service to Belize. Francis Usher, for service to Belize. Member of the Order of the British Empire MB. Benjamin Nicholas, for services to the arts. Francis Renaud, for service in the field of music. Joan Louise Ellenstein, Mrs. Samuels, for services to education and the community. Gilvano Reynaldo Swasi, for services to the arts. Saint Christopher and Nevis, Order of the British Empire. Member of the Order of the British Empire MB. Dr. Stanley Merck Dennis, for service to the field of education. Samuel James Nathaniel, for public service. References